Hello, and welcome to the Accessible Syllabus training. The Office of Accessibility Resources has put together this training content to support the creation of accessible educational documents, such as course syllabi, student handbooks, plans of study, and more. This training will guide you through the steps necessary to create accessible Microsoft Word documents, exporting those Word documents to PDF, and comparing the possibilities as well as the limitations of automated accessibility checking. It does not cover additional software like Google Docs, Web Campus, PowerPoint, or Excel. Covered in this training, you will find the difference between accessibility and accommodations, types of disabilities, and the associated accessibility concerns for design consideration, how to reference the accessibility standards, anatomy of an accessible document, accessibility requirements for document structure like headings, lists, and tables, how to create accessible links, how and when to provide alternative text for images, appropriate use of color and contrast, how to save your accessible Word document as an accessible PDF, and how to check for accessibility, both manually and automatically. Accessible academic documents are part of a larger initiative to create an inclusive environment at UNLV that includes, but is not limited to, curricular materials, web content, software and apps, and many procured or adopted IT products. To create and continue to ensure accessibility campus-wide, it is everyone's responsibility to consider accessibility when creating and publishing digital content. Allowing students with disabilities equal opportunities in education is mentioned as far back as the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and is specified again in the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. Specific guidance on digital accessibility for universities was given by the Department of Education and Department of Justice's Joint Office of Civil Rights, Dear Colleague letter in 2010, and the follow-up Frequently Asked Questions in 2011. Creating accessible documents at UNLV helps us comply with these among other legal requirements, keeps us in compliance with UNLV's Information and Communication Technology Accessibility Policy, in effect January 2020, and ensures all students have equal opportunity to succeed. Put simply, it's the right thing to do. Here you can find the Office of Accessibility Resources team contact information. Please email us at accessibilityresourceteam-request@unlv.edu with any accessibility questions or concerns. Let's explore accessibility and accommodations next. Accessible means that individuals with disabilities are able to independently acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services within the same time frame as individuals without disabilities, with substantially equivalent ease of use. Accessibility, therefore, is a proactive process, accommodating persons with disabilities and supports the development of a universally designed environment that is usable by everyone, or the most people possible. A few examples of digital accessibility are accessible web pages, accessible instructional materials, accessible apps, and an accessible media player. Materials and media that are accessible includes content that is usable by the most people possible without providing additional modifications. And appropriate functionality is designed into the content, learning object, application, media, etc. Accommodations are reasonable academic adjustments or auxiliary aids that provide equal access to programs and services on an individual basis. A few examples of reasonable academic adjustments or auxiliary aids are extended time on tests, taking an exam in a minimal distraction area, recording a lecture, having a note taker, or providing American Sign Language, ASL, during a live meeting. Materials and media that are not accessible includes content that requires additional modifications before it's usable by an individual with a disability, or providing ad hoc or after the fact, and which may involve a time delay as to when the content is available. What is the difference between accessibility and accommodation? Accessibility is achieved through the use of identified standards like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to design environments to be used by everyone, including persons with disabilities, and oversight is often provided by an accessibility manager and/or ADA coordinator. Accessibility is a proactive process for a person with a disability that provides equal access to materials or media at the same time as provided to a person without a disability. Accommodations, in contrast, are requested by a person with a disability and determined to be reasonable on an individual basis by an appointed representative, often in a disability service office like the DRC, Disability Resource Center, here at UNLV. Accommodations may be needed beyond an accessible environment for equal access to programs and services because of the individual nature of the disability, not due to an environment's inaccessible design. In short, accommodations are a reactive process that often addresses inaccessibility after the fact in an ad hoc process due to materials and software not designed to be accessible. Here is a video on IT accessibility from the perspective of campus administrators from various institutions. This second video provides a personal look at accessibility in higher education from the perspective of students or non-administrators. Disability types and concerns. In order to understand how accessibility and technology intersect, it is helpful to have a basic understanding of a range of disabilities, related barriers with information and communication technology, or ICT, and assistive technology, or AT. Not all people with disabilities experience barriers with digital materials and technologies. Persons with different types of disabilities encounter different types of barriers. While we generally think of barriers in terms of access for people with disabilities, there are some barriers that impact all types of users, though these are often thought of in terms of usability. Usability and accessibility go hand in hand. Adding accessibility features improves usability for others. Many people, including those who do not consider themselves to have a specific disability, such as those who wear corrective lenses, may find themselves experiencing typical age-related loss of sight, hearing, or cognitive ability as they get older. Disability types we mentioned in this section of the introduction are visual, auditory, mobility, also known as motor or physical, and cognitive, which includes learning disabilities, mental health, and neurodiversity. For those of you who wish to learn about or reference seizure disabilities, please use the following WebAIM article on seizure disorders. Some people are susceptible to seizures caused by strobing, flickering, or flashing effects. In general, if the content flashes more than 3 times per second, is notably large, and has bright contrast in the flashes, it may cause a seizure and must be avoided. Because of time limitations in this version of UNLV accessibility training, we cannot cover these in more depth during this session. If you wish to complete a training with more demonstrations and details about these disability types and concerns, please consider following up with our Foundations of Accessibility training. We will cover some assistive technologies associated with disability types in this introduction. Visual. Visual disabilities might include a range of considerations, including people who are blind, people with low or reduced vision, and people who experience a degree of color deficiency or color blindness. The way a person would interact with digital content will depend heavily on their abilities, experiences, and preferred assistive technology. The way a person would interact with digital content will depend heavily on their abilities, experiences, and preferred assistive technology or adaptive strategies. Common assistive technologies. Screen reader. Screen reader software turns visual information into audio information and allows for a person to control their computer using additional keyboard commands. This type of assistive technology is more common This type of assistive technology is most common for someone who is blind. Refreshable Braille display. Refreshable Braille display is an electronic device that outputs lines of Braille text and may allow a person to compose or input using Braille as well. This may be partnered with a screen reader software. This may be partnered with screen reader software mentioned above, and this is most common for someone who is blind or both deaf and blind. Screen magnification. Screen magnification allows a user to zoom in to an area of the screen or change text color and its background for better visibility. This type is most common for someone who has low or reduced vision. Browser or zoom. Browser or program zoom. Browser or program zoom. Browser or program zoom are settings on a computer or in a computer program that allow a user to zoom in or enlarge text sizes, and is most common for someone who has low or reduced vision. Text-to-speech. Text-to-speech reads passages or full pages of text aloud to a user. This has fewer commands. This typically has fewer commands and customizations than a screen reader, and may be more likely to indicate on screen what is being voiced. Most common for someone who has low or reduced vision, but also for those with cognitive or learning disabilities mentioned below. Color customization. One of several computer programs like Visolve or built-in settings like low contrast mode, which can adjust visibility for someone who may be colorblind. Common barriers for visual disabilities. Individuals who use these types of assistive technologies may experience barriers when content is only presented in a visual way, as an image with no text alternative, or alt text. Elements like buttons or forms require a mouse and cannot be manipulated with keyboard controls. Content does not cleanly resize or enlarge when needed. Text color does not contrast with its background. Text is presented as an image or screenshot rather than placed in the page as text. Color or visual cues are used as the only way of conveying important information. The structural components of the document, like section headings, are presented visually but not conveyed to the assistive technology. Insufficient time is allowed to complete an activity. Unexpected things happen while the user is reading or using content, like pop-ups or page changes that were not triggered by user action. Here are additional resources available for a deeper dive. Auditory. Most people who are deaf or hard of hearing tend to face barriers where audio content is presented without text-based alternatives, and may encounter relatively few barriers with content otherwise. Those who are deaf and blind will face many more barriers, including those described for people who are blind. Those who are deaf and blind will face many more barriers, including those described for people who are blind. For those who communicate with American Sign Language, or ASL, the written language of a website may produce barriers similar to those faced when reading in a second language. Common assistive technologies. Devices that produce text, like computers, smartphones, and text telephone devices, TTYs or TDDs. Assistive listening devices, which amplify sounds in speech and improve what is known as a speech-to-noise ratio. A person who is deaf-blind may use a refreshable braille display connected to a computer or smartphone via Bluetooth. Common barriers. Individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing may experience barriers when audio is presented without a transcript, multimedia is presented without captions or transcript, media players do not display captions and/or do not provide volume controls, media services, including web applications, rely on interaction using voice only. There is a lack of ASL interpretation for live interaction with ASL or deaf community when needed. Please find additional auditory disability resources found in the Learn More section. Cognitive, learning, and neurodiversity. Learning and cognitive-related disabilities can be as varied as mobility-related disabilities, perhaps more so. These disabilities can range from a mild reading-related disability to very severe cognitive impairments that may result in limited use of language and difficulty processing complex information. For most of the disabilities in this range, there are some common barriers and others that only affect those with severe cognitive disabilities. Common assistive technologies. Text-to-speech. Text-to-speech reads passages or full pages of text aloud to a user, typically has fewer commands and customizations than a screen reader, and may be more likely to indicate on screen what is being voiced. Very common for individuals with cognitive or learning disabilities, but also common for those with low or reduced vision. Speech recognition. Speech recognition composes text or controls a computer by voice. Common barriers. Individuals with cognitive or learning disabilities may experience barriers when content is not well organized and structured with sections, headings, topics identified, etc. Content is not well organized and structured with section headings, topics identified, etc. The navigation of a course or document is inconsistent throughout. Text is not conveyed to the assistive technology to be read aloud, as in an image-only PDF. Content is presented in a needlessly complex way or with overly advanced language. Insufficient time is allowed to complete an activity. Unexpected things happen while the user is reading or using content. Math equations and formulas are presented without being conveyed to the assistive technology. Content is only presented in a visual way, with no text alternative. Text is fully justified, causing the words to be inconsistently spaced or presented in such a way that the spacing between words or lines is insufficient. Please find additional resources below. Learn more. Accessibility standards. How is digital accessibility defined? The functional standard for accessibility found in the new Section 508 rule provides guidance that enhances the functional nature of the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust or POUR design initiative found in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1a and AA. To meet our obligations under ADA and 504, our information and communication technology should be functionally accessible and not just technically conformant. To meet our obligations under ADA and 504, our information and communication technology should be functionally accessible and not just technically conformant. To meet our functional accessibility standard means that any person can use the resource effectively to perform the designed intent. The resource is easy to use and content is clear and unambiguous for all users, including persons with disabilities. When designing content, keep in mind used by people who may have severe or moderate visual impairment, used by people who may be colorblind, used by people who may be deaf or hard of hearing, used by people who may have motor disabilities, used by people who may have cognitive and learning disabilities. In this training, we have provided a WCAG 2 rubric to help you design and review content for accessibility. Universities were given significant guidance about accessibility by the Department of Justice and the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, in the 2010 Dear Colleague Letter and the follow-up 2011 Dear Colleague Letter, Frequently Asked Questions. UNLV Digital Accessibility. In January 2020, UNLV, through the University Policy Committee, approved its Information and Communication Technology Accessibility Policy, which is accompanied by its standards and procedures. This is part of a 5-phase plan for university-wide digital accessibility. Anatomy of an accessible syllabus document. For our compressed training, we will cover these topics as we review them as accessible elements to a syllabus document. 1. Headings. 2. Lists. 3. Links. 4. Alternative text for images and visuals. 5. Tables. In addition, we will address color and contrast, how to check your Word document for accessibility, and saving a PDF to preserve applied, accessible settings and formatting. Before we dive into work on our actual documents, we will compare a not yet accessible document with one that is optimized for basic accessibility. Here is an example of an inaccessible document. Here is an example of an accessible document. Here is a video demonstration of the NVDA screen reader reading an accessible document.
Heading Level 1. The School College of Education. The School College of Education is an elite academic institution in the desert southwest of the United States which trains the teachers who will teach the generations of tomorrow. We endeavor to follow all best practices so that you graduate too cool for school. Link enroll today. Heading Level 2. Our degree programs. List with 3 items. Bullet Bachelor of Arts Teaching. Bullet Bachelor of Arts Secondary Education. Bullet Master of Science Technology and Education out of list. Heading Level 2. Our diversity policy. The School College of Education believes that all students should be in school, and we strive to have an inclusive and welcoming environment for all students. Heading Level 2. Tuitions estimates. How much does it cost to go to school? Not as much as you'd think. See our estimates below to help plan this important part of your future. Table with 3 rows and 3 columns. Tuition estimates. In state versus out of state. Row 1. Column 1. Type of student. Column 2. Semester. Column 3. 4-year degree. Row to column 1. In state. Column to $1,200. Column 3. $9,600. Row 3. Column 1. Out of state. Column to $3,300. Column 3. $26,400.
The computer is not a typewriter. Page 1 of 2. As the ultimate goal for many syllabi is that they will become an accessible PDF for student use and/or the UNLV Degrees Directory, these preliminary items cover essentials that must be considered, if not applied. Menu versus ribbons. We have 2 areas for the tools: the menu, the ribbons. The top line with white lettering on a blue background is considered the menu. These choices are fixed. They don't dynamically change based on usage context. While the ribbons are the context-specific band which change depending which menu item is active and has black lettering on a gray background. You'll notice in the last image a portion of the layouts ribbon, including page setup and paragraph, that are used to create accessible gaps and spacing in your documents. Here are the settings to apply and the tools to use for creating accessible Word documents. They can be found in the File menu, Home menu, Layout menu, and View menu.